I really should have predicted. I was genuinely thinking about adding in Stipe eye poking the shit out of Cormier after we published the episode, but before the fight.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh my god, he's going to eye poke the shit out of Cormier as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I didn't. So I couldn't be bothered to post it.
I mean, that was really, not literally, of course, but that's really on the nose in terms of just trying to find the dumbest possible reversal of the previous fights. It's just DC getting blinded with a savage eye poke.
Yeah.
And getting really pissed about it too, which I guess I understand because I'd be pissed if someone stuck their finger 2 knuckles deep into my eye. But also, it's a bit too much flavor of righteous indignation to Cormier's upset when literally in the same fight he poked Stipe in the eye at least once.
Yeah, I mean it's a chain of eye poking outrage.
In the moment that he got poked, he was reaching out for Stipe's face with his fingers outstretched.
Right. It's almost just like a beautiful moment, which, like, it came so close. If his arms were slightly longer, it would have just really encapsulated the shit show of, like, high-level, heavier weight MMA. If just the two of them had just been eye-poking each other at the same time, it would have been this perfectly symmetrical image.
It was sort of like it was like the greatness within reach poster. But just
because that's exactly what I was thinking of,
One guy's finger is just fully embedded in the other's eye socket.
Frontal lobes within reach.
Yeah. When you eye poke as much as these men, your reach really does exceed your grasp. Ba-dum.
But yeah, like, it does seem that, like, you either, die as the eye poke hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the eye poke villain.
Well, you don't really see yourself become the villain, do you? All right. Hello, und willkommen to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. I'm trying to make it sound very German. Phil, Mackenzie is here with me, as always. Phil, how you doing? Or should I say...
Yeah, not too bad.
Wie geht's?
Gut, danke. Und dir?
So la la. We were talking about some confusingly plotted German TV show that Phil is watching just before this. I refuse to shout out the name of it because Phil has become increasingly unsatisfied with the way it's developed, and so it deserves to be seen by no one. But it has put me in a very Deutsch mood, and that's good because... No, there's no way to tie that in. Stipe Miocic is Croatian. Welcome to Heavy Hands. We're going to be talking about UFC 252 on today's episode. Of course, ahead of us is Fight Night card main evented by Pedro Munoz and Frankie Edgar. And that's a pretty interesting fight. A lot of X factors involved. Edgar's first fight at bantamweight. Edgar's chin not appearing to be good anymore, or at least having aged past the point where his stamina can help him recover. So we'll be getting into that. There's approximately one other fight from that card that we want to talk about, and that's Mizuki Inoue versus Amanda Lemos. So really at the tail end of today's episode, you're going to hear a little bit of preview. But of course, the meat of the show today is UFC 252. Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier 3, and several other bouts, mostly from the main card, which is pretty much what we stuck to for our preview as well, but that's where all the good action was, let's be real. Phil, have you learned a valuable lesson?
I try never to do that.
Yeah. Which is a good way to go through life, but I do think when trying to chase the stupidest outcome, which was, of course, your innovative method for predicting this fight last week, I think you have to keep in mind there's always a stupider outcome. There's always a sort of a flavor of stupid that you could not anticipate. It's the nature of stupidity. So the fact that, for example, that Stipe Miocic nearly blinded Daniel Cormier with an eye poke, that is a really stupid reversal. from the previous dynamic. But, you know what really, really got me? And everyone is going to know what I'm about to say. You know how in their second fight, Stipe Miocic kind of lost for a while and then like accidentally discovered the left hook to the body and then threw it a million times until he won? You know how we were wondering, like, is he just going to forget that? Is he not going to come in with it? Or is he going to wait 3 rounds again or whatever? And, instead he came into the fight and he was going to the body really early. It's like one of the first committed punches he threw was a left hook to the body. It was part of a lot of body head combinations. It was looking great. And, except that this time, instead of waiting 4 rounds to do it, he did it for a round and a half and then stopped doing it for the remainder of a 5-round fight. He just forgot about it.
Well, yeah. This was great. So yeah, I in defense of my strategy, which was, I believe, correct.
You had the right idea.
General outlook and,
yeah.
I did actually think, oh shit, Stipe's gonna eye poke the shit out of Cormier because someone else said, in reply to after we posted the episode, they were like, I think the stupidest way is for, Stipe to win via DQ due to eye pokes. Mm-hmm. And I thought, after that, I suddenly thought, oh no, Stipe's gonna eye poke the shit out of him. That's the stupid outcome. Mm-hmm. That's the one I've missed. And then, true enough, it did.
Not that Cormier didn't get his own in. He always does.
Oh yeah. He always does, yeah. But yeah, the body shots, that was fantastic. Yeah. Because I think we've also learned something, which is that, as one adaptation can be slotted in, another springs out like a 90s board game.
Yeah.
Which is, I like to imagine that, like, you know, Stipe's there in the fight and he's just sitting there thinking like, okay guys, body shots. We're punching into body shots. And then suddenly Cormier closes into the clinch and he's sitting there thinking, oh shit, getting fucked up in the clinch again. Okay, focus, Stipe, focus.
You've been practicing.
Get the underhook.
You've been practicing
right hand,
your Stipe.
Push him into the fence. And there was something else I was doing at the start of the fight.
Oh, I forget.
Nah, fuck it.
It's a little too legible, intelligible.
Yeah.
But pretty good. You've clearly been working. You've been working on the impression.
Quotes going around out there at the moment.
Yeah.
Just like, like clips from the post-fight press conference about like I think someone asking him about retirement, and he just offers grating gibberish in reply.
Yeah. Oh, well, I try to sit by what? Thank you, Stipe.
But yeah, because basically, as soon as like in the early going of this fight, he was working the body. But then the clinch exchanges were playing out exactly like they were the first time as well.
Exactly.
And yeah, and then he figured out the clinch and completely forgot about the body shots.
Yeah. I got the feeling that was maybe something they brought in to answer the clinch, but that in focusing on it, he got distracted from the body, or this truly was like a level of stupid I couldn't have anticipated. I'm not even calling either man particularly stupid for this happening. It's just a stupid development. Was that Daniel Cormier seemed to regain and hold on to the better stamina in the final round of the fight. Because Stipe forgot about the body, the shape of the fight totally changed to Cormier having a good start and a very good finish. Which was not supposed to happen. Like that was all I thought I understood about the dynamic of this matchup is what, at the very least, I know that Daniel Cormier is going to fade and Miocic is going to have the edge going, the longer the fight goes on. Even that wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
What is it with heavyweights? And I mentioned, Junior Dos Santos, and we will have a chance to discuss Mr. Dos Santos. What is it with heavyweights and like their adaptations just being like a one move thing that just like obliterates the rest of their functioning game? Cause it's like JDS with the elbow and it addresses, against Kane. I bring this up all the time. And the silly thing is that it was a An idea that might have surprised Kane once or twice and would have become less and less effective the more he tried it, and it addressed nothing about the positional. It would be like fighting Ronda Rousey and coming in with a Kimura counter to the armbar. You know what I mean? As like your only new move. And then once she defends it, you're like, oh shit, am I just supposed to keep going for it? It's a total Hail Mary sort of adjustment. And for Stipe in this fight, it was essentially double unders. And or an underhook and wrist control. Which worked really well. I mean, I have to be honest, I was impressed with how successful he was at controlling Cormier in the clinch.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, it was a pretty offensively neutral position, and it seemed to let Daniel Cormier rest. Because he was not stressed out in the clinch. Stipe wasn't trying to take him down. He wasn't like making him wrestle, really. He just kind of got to chill with his back to the cage. And the cost of this tactic was just not going to the body and letting Cormier back into the fight more and more. I don't know. Explain it, Phil. I'm rambling. Explain it to me. Make it make sense.
I mean, heavyweights aren't very good as
well.
But I mean, I think that also translates to meaning that it's incredibly stressful to fight someone who actually is pretty decent.
Yeah.
Like the thing is that most heavyweights very infrequently, even I would imagine, spar against technically proficient and deep fighters in the same way that lighter weight fighters do.
Right. When they do, they're frequently smaller and they can probably get by bullying them, you know?
Yeah. So I'd imagine it is simply incredibly stressful to fight people who are as good as you in a way that it's just not for lighter weight fighters.
That is almost certainly true. I think I addressed this on a Patreon bonus episode I did a while back, a little solo bonus app where I talked about, you know, why we should forgive heavyweights for being so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can't help it. They have no choice but to work with other heavyweights.
So yeah, I mean, I think in a fight like this, which, I mean, this was, I think we would have been much more forgiving of the quality of this fight if this had been their first fight, it would have been great.
Yeah, no, it was not bad fight.
This had momentum swings. It was competitive.
Mm-hmm. It was the fact that it was the conclusion to a trilogy. I think also the fact that the co-main event had went out with a bit of an anticlimactic whimper, sort of added to the an air of disappointment to this one. But it was not a bad fight.
But yeah, and I thought DC made good adjustments as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing, is in that throughout the course of this fight, I mean, this trilogy, I've basically cemented my opinions, which is that Stipe is just the better fighter, and but Daniel Cormier I think has generally prepared better every time.
Mm-hmm.
Because this time he moved away from the sort of mummy guard. He weaved into his entries a lot more, which meant that he wasn't just like trying to hand fight his way into range again.
At least in the early going, before he forgot about it, he was very active with the low kicks as well.
Yep,
it was pretty much the Jones rematch strategy.
He went for low kicks and body shots. The problem is that he's, as we've seen, you know, multiple times before, he's still just, I mean, neither of these guys are defensively particularly great, but
he did have some notion, and I want to be very clear, some notion of how to stop that left hook to the body. He had clearly made people use it in sparring or in drills. It wasn't well done, but he was attempting to defend it.
Yeah. And he managed to, like, get himself into multiple positions where he could, like, weave in, like, to get an angle, which Stipe would then have to retreat off on.
Mm-hmm.
And he would then chase him down with, like, multiple jabs and potentially a right hand after it. And I was like, yeah, all that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It was good. But yeah, he's still just defensively not really there. And aside from these things which tend to peel away over time, and has to hit. I said this on Twitter. He has to hit a pace which he can't sustain.
Right.
And we talked about that as well last week.
Yeah, although weirdly, he could sustain it. That's the weird thing, because of how Miocic chose to approach this fight. And for Miocic's part, I do think he came in right away doing the things that worked for him in the rematch. That is very much to his credit. There was a lot more movement. There were combinations from the get-go, lots of feints and jabs. He was not just standing in front of Cormier waiting to feel and see how fast his hands were, right away, as he did for the first 2 rounds of their rematch. Basically just stood right in front of him. So that was good. It's just that the next level of that was to lose a lot of those tactics, was to forget about them because he wanted to focus on the wrestling. I just don't really understand that as an adaptation. It's not as if he didn't end up eating that same, underhook sort of throw by to right hook move that DC knocked him out with in the first fight. It's not as if he didn't eat that 24 times in this fight. He neutralized the clinch somewhat, but really the fact that he now knows that shot is coming seems to be all that it has taken for him to be able to withstand it. So I'm not really sure what he succeeded in doing by controlling DC without doing any work to tire him out as he was doing so. I don't know. Is it fair to say he's the better fighter? His adjustment, he took himself out of the fight.
But again, in a sort of cardio-neutral situation like that, particularly when size comes into play, if I was Stipe, I would be expecting that to tire Cormier out more than me. If nothing else, this was a remarkable cardio performance from Daniel Cormier, considering what we've seen from him.
Yeah, he got hurt early too, and I honestly think Stipe was more tired than Cormier at the end of this fight. In fact, that may be part of the reason he was going for those clinches. I think he wanted to rest himself.
Yeah,
because he certainly wasn't. Like I said, he wasn't very active. He wasn't trying to chain takedown attempts or disrupt Cormier's balance. He wasn't doing a lot of knees to the legs and body or anything like that. It was very underhook and wrist control, or double underhooks and control. So
yeah, the third round was definitely, I think, a mutual time off round kind of thing. Yeah. Because Stipe had gassed himself out going for the finish, and Cormier was still trying to get his wits back about him.
Yeah. So, good fight. I don't know if it was the conclusion to the trilogy that we were all hoping for.
It was better than what I was hoping for, but also very similar to what I was thinking of, in that, Stipe would forget about the body shots and would just sort of generally win a conventional kickboxing match.
Was his corner yelling at him to go back to the body and he was ignoring them? I don't even remember that. I just think they all forgot about it.
It actually reminded me of Ige Keita.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the main thing was just that, there was a small guy with a explosive burst edge who could clip the big guy, but then the big guy just had a significant power differential. The strikes were pretty even in all of those rounds, but you could just see that whenever Stipe hit Cormier, it was just hurting him a lot more.
Yeah.
Like I said, I still feel pretty bad for Cormier here. I think because selling out on a 1-round finish would have been, or an early finish and just trying to blitz Stipe might have been a more probabilistic,
more likely
favorable way.
Yeah.
But he actually wanted to be able to win a 5-round decision.
It would have Please go on.
He came pretty close to doing it.
He did. I think he won the first and the fifth rounds.
Yeah. And the second round basically came down to him getting caught by the fence with 10 seconds to go.
Yep. Yeah, without that was a very close round. Yeah, it is sad. I don't know. I mean, did we mention how it was at least a little funny that people getting injured is not funny, but it also kind of is. And Daniel Cormier being so mad about the eye poke. I think the real treat was that in the image of him receiving the eye poke, it's probably an Esther Lin photo. Most of the best ones are. He was, literally reaching out right at Stipe's face at the exact same moment. It was really just a reach advantage that secured the eye poke for Stipe rather than Cormier. So yeah. I don't know. I think I'm left with this weird sort of flat feeling about it, even though it was a good fight. But maybe part of that is my residual affection for Daniel Cormier. And yeah, feeling like it did feel strangely anticlimactic for him in particular, especially because he had more and different kinds of success than I expected, and it still just didn't yield a win.
Yeah, and I think it's in part just that these two are both very well matched and with a clear edge in one direction, that it sort of gives us a particularly, in some ways, bleakly clear view of what the technical ceiling of heavyweight is. Mm-hmm. Of what the sort of technical and conceptual ceiling of this division is. But yeah, like going back to the eye poke, people were saying about how, badly his eye was jacked up afterwards. His eye had been jacked up by the flurry at the end of the second round. I remember looking at it afterwards and thinking, man, how's he going to see?
Yeah.
He'd been getting punched a lot in that eye before then. I'm not saying that the eye poke didn't affect the fight, and rounds 4 and 5 were reasonably close as far as I can recall.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
I mean, I think in the same way that people attribute the entirety of DC's win in the first fight to the eye pokes, they want to attribute the entirety of his loss in this fight to the eye pokes. You're right.
He won the 4th round on a lot of people's cards after the eye poke. So,
Yeah, and his eye was starting to close after the second round. He got hit with about a dozen right hooks in a row, right on that left eye. So, well, it happened. The trilogy's over, and now we get to move on to fresh, new challenges for the heavyweight title. Like, for example, Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou 2. Which seems the most likely outcome, although I guess we should note that Jon Jones has ostensibly vacated the light heavyweight title, according to his Twitter, and seems actually committed to his move to heavyweight. I still don't believe it until I see it happen. I think there's a bully in Jon Jones that really that is revolted by the idea of being like out-muscled by big guys. I don't think he wants to know what that feels like, really, but he's probably reached the point where it's now or never. And according to him, it's happening. So maybe it'll be Miocic Jones. And it'll be a lovely sort of it'll be like an STD, returning to its origin. That Jon Jones taught Daniel Cormier how to eye poke, and Cormier clearly has now fully taught Stipe Miocic how to eye poke, and now the originator will meet the final victim of this awful transmissible disease. It'll be great.
Can't wait.
Yep. All right. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, the co-main event, Cheeto Vera versus Sean O'Malley. Again, sort of weird and anticlimactic, but we do have some things to say about it. We're also going to talk about Jairzinho Rozenstruik beating a surprisingly deft Junior Dos Santos. Really looked like his old self, except without the old chin. And Merab Dvalishvili had a boring, I think I can say that, only because I will also be saying later that it was a very intelligent performance to get a decision win over John Dodson. We're going to talk about all of that, plus Munoz versus Edgar and more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution
No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are continuing on through our recap and breakdown of UFC 252. The co-main event was a bantamweight fight between Chito Vera and Sean O'Malley, who had all this hype, to the extent that Chito Vera, I would have been disgusted by this, Phil, if I weren't so excited to take advantage. Chito Vera was at the time that I placed a bet, a plus 220 underdog to Sean O'Malley. That's big. I mean, as they mentioned several times during the event, most people thought he beat Song Yadong. At least a slim majority seemed to have thought that he won that fight. And, I don't know. He also, given what we saw from Sean O'Malley in the past, I mean, you and I, it didn't really take all that much. Not that you and I are the, any kind of authority on, picking fights correctly, but we certainly saw, the shape of a fight that could be definitely won by Chito Vera in a couple of Sean O'Malley's previous wins. We saw that third round fade. And if anyone fades in the third round, you got to think Chito Vera has a pretty good shot of making things interesting. So I bet $10 and won 22. That was lovely. And that makes me feel better about the fact that the ending was really rather disappointing. What do you think?
Yeah, this made me kind of sad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I really would have liked to see Chito get the kind of tough blood and guts win we all wanted him to. This really kind of reminded me of Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway.
In
that I was like, I picked one of you to win, and he won, and I think that's a legit win, and I would pick you again. I'd pick the guy who won again, but also I was really expecting something cool, and I didn't get to see that at all.
Yeah, even less so, because in that, at least Max Holloway was like right away getting the better of Charles Oliveira.
Yeah.
In this, like we're still really kind of waiting for the turn. I think it had just begun. I was also reminded a bit, not to revisit one of your most humiliating defeats, Phil, but it reminded me a bit of Jessica Andrade Rose Namajunas, that dynamic, where there was a slight development in who was controlling the fight, and then it ended abruptly. But there wasn't even that much. I mean, honestly, I can't even recall exactly whether Chito started to make the right adjustments before the leg injury or not. I guess we should say up front, do you buy the idea that Chito Vera was responsible for the case of dead leg on Sean O'Malley's part?
I mean, yeah, but
there's some reason to believe that he at least aggravated an injury with a low kick behind the knee, hit him on the sciatic nerve or whatever. We've seen that before from calf kicks and from kicks behind the leg.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of there had been a lot of collisions. I think Chito had a couple of hard checks. He'd also eaten a couple of clean low kicks.
Really hard kicks, yeah.
Yeah.
Any one of those also could have injured the foot if it just landed a little wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the main thing that really struck me was that O'Malley was not setting the kind of I don't think he was setting himself up for a win with the pace he was fighting at.
Right. Put a lot out there early.
Yeah, I mean, Chito is a notorious... I mean, he put a lot out there, and he wasn't, connecting with anything that was going to, hurt Chito or make him change his game plan at all.
I mean, it was a tried of stuff, but would he have been able to stay on those targets consistently? And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If what you're doing is going for one and done low kicks and body kicks, and you're not trying to exchange at all, sort of does mean that you're going to be setting yourself up for a battle of toughness that you might not necessarily want.
Yeah.
Because I was expecting him to land a lot more in terms of head strikes, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Because people have done that to Chito a lot.
Mm-hmm.
One of his is great strengths is not head striking defense.
One of his great strengths is not needing head striking defense.
Yeah, I mean, but this is the thing as well, is that we've seen, like, that's the second time we've seen O'Malley's foot fall off in the middle of a fight.
Yeah.
And that's just a really worrying thing to see from a young fighter. You just don't want to see them falling to bits like that.
Yeah, same foot, apparently the same injury. That's a really bad sign this early in his career.
Yeah, and as we've said before, brutal, unthinkable physical toughness is the primary attribute to have as an MMA fighter.
Yeah.
And Chito Vera has that in spades.
Yep. It allowed Chito Vera to get over a much rustier start to his MMA career. You know, if without his toughness, he would not have been here to pick up this win, you know, fortunate or not.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. There are just some guys which can turn what would be career-ending beatings for other people or vast, hideous trauma into, like, learning experiences, because Chito Vera can be being mauled by John Lineker and just can be there going, oh God, this is uncomfortable.
Yep.
And I'm not enjoying this at all. Or like Mark Giacchese against Rafael Fiziev. They can just spend durability in ways which other fighters can't.
It's like they say, you either win or you learn or your bones turn into dust. Those are really the three outcomes of any exciting fight. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just not a good sign. There's not a whole lot to say, technically speaking. I mean, Chito Vera, you knew the moment. I mean, I knew the moment O'Malley was injured. I think I tweeted something along the lines of, let's see if Chito Vera does nothing but go for ill-conceived takedowns like Andre Sukumtat did. Well, now that he notices that O'Malley's injured. Yeah, not likely. Even if he had, actually, which, you know, he did end up on the ground.
Instantly, yeah.
Right. You don't want him on top of you any less than you want Sukumtat on top of you. So, a truly one of the scariest elbows I've ever seen landed on the ground. The sound of, it wasn't even the sound of the elbow. It was the force of the elbow rocketing O'Malley's head back against the floor that made a thunderous sound. I was surprised there wasn't a dent in the plywood and canvas when O'Malley finally got off that spot. But yeah, there's not a whole lot else to say. I mean, I think Chito Vera was starting to make the right adjustments. I always expected him to take some licks early and then figure it out. But honestly, there really wasn't even time to see those adjustments unfold.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I would have expected Chito, in a fight where O'Malley has to win, I would have expected Chito to be in more trouble by that point.
Yeah.
But that's all I can really say.
Yeah. Well.
But yeah, also I will say credit to Herb Dean for who's been hideously inconsistent, but he stopped this, and probably saved O'Malley from one of the aforementioned career-altering beatings.
Yep. It was a very good stoppage. There was no stability on that leg. He was not able to Robert Whittaker his way out of it. I mean, I don't think it was an injury he could really work with. It was pretty clear his foot was numb, like he couldn't feel it.
Yep.
So, no matter how he tried to adjust, he just couldn't put weight on one of his feet. You're not going to win a fight like that. So, yeah, Herb Dean's the problem with him has never been that he's, incapable of being a good ref. As you said, it's always been the inconsistency. So I'm not going to celebrate him too much because I'm sure, murderous Herb Dean will be back, and probably very soon. Okay, let's continue on down this main card though. You know, we were very down on JDS last week. I think to paraphrase your sort of summary of what he had become in his last few fights, he was a guy who now only seemed to want to throw and land his worst punch, the famous what's the Ippo punch called? Dragonfish overhand, dragonfish blow.
Much. The rainbow punch, I think it's known on the rainbow overhand, as it's known on Twitter.
Yes, the rainbow overhand. And he actually looked like JDS Classic. like in a really refreshing way. We've already accepted the fact that JDS is never getting better. You know, if he adds anything new to his game, it's going to be the aforementioned silly, tiny tactical adjustment. His game is his game, and it has been for years. But he seemed to take a step back into like the JDS game that will, if JDS had another 10 years to fight, which I don't think he does physically, but you never say never, it's heavyweight. But if he had another 10 years and could fight exactly that way, it will still pick up a lot of wins. You know, by the standards of heavyweight, it's an incredibly effective outboxing style. And, the first thing that stood out to me was like, he tried his left hook. He countered with his left hook. And he set it up off the body jab, which is a nice little trick he used to do a lot. He was working his jabs and his feints. You know, he was moving around his opponent as he tried to snipe these shots in. And then in, perfectly classic JDS fashion, he then got backed into the cage and exploded. So it was really like, the only thing that wasn't JDS classic was the chin, that he couldn't survive his catastrophic positioning errors. But otherwise, I really couldn't have told you a difference between the guy I saw fight here and say the one who beat Ben Rothwell.
Yeah, it was a refreshing resurgence, I thought.
Mm-hmm. A return to form at the very least.
Where you're like, oh yeah, I remember this is how he used to lose fights. Yeah. And he wasn't just
and he did lose.
Selling out for insane, nutty punches. Not that he didn't also do that.
Well, he's always has. They've always been an element.
Yeah, he's always done that. But yeah, at least he's done... In his best performance, he's done stuff to set up the nutty right hand.
Yeah.
And he did that here. And and then he just backed into the fence and, as you said, completely detonated.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, it was somehow strangely reassuring to see.
He was even going for all the spinning wheel kicks and shit.
Mm-hmm.
It was all there. Except for the chin. What did you make of Rozenstruik? Anything to say about his performance here? I mean, I think our call ultimately was he has the barest level of technique and the power and durability necessary to win this. That did seem to be the primary difference. In fact, I think tactically, like, JDS kind of got the better of him for a good bit of this fight.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably literally just, I think it's literally just chin.
Yeah.
I mean, JDS hit him with huge punches and, he shook them off, which does also, indicate just how powerful Ngannou might be. But, but yeah, that was it. I think he's just been through less wars and, I mean, and it was positioning as well. He was, backing away and seeing the shot coming when he was getting hit. And JDS was, I think something that, Jack Slack called out, one of the few times JDS will reliably throw a left hook is when his back is to the cage and he's completely out of position. And he did that here and died.
Yeah. I literally lined up perfectly with you saying that. It just happened in the footage I'm watching. So, yep, he sure does love to lean back and leave himself really open. A word to the wise. When you throw a left hook, your weight should stay between your feet. You should not lean back to gain leverage. That is a very bad habit to fall into. Your weight should either stay on the front foot, and you should stay over your feet, or more technically proper, it should go to the back foot. It shouldn't go behind your ass where you have to take a step backwards to catch your own weight. So yeah. But that's again, classic JDS. It's not like these are, unforeseen or unprecedented technical errors from him. And I guess to Rozenstruik's credit, he did, he recognized that he wanted to put JDS against the fence. And after the first round, his approach seemed to sort of simplify itself to stalk forward, make him throw, and then counter. Because every time you counter, he's going to take a really big step backwards. Mm-hmm. And he basically just inched him to the fence by inviting that kind of exchange over and over until he had JDS there, permanently, as he likes to be. Okay. Well, finally, I mean, we should at least mention, because I know you were excited to have him back, Daniel Pineda beat Herbert Burns largely on the ground.
Yeah.
Which is very impressive. So good for him. But the one I really want to talk about, not nearly as exciting as that fight, Merab Dvalishvili fought John Dodson. And I think it's perfect, Phil, that old Johnny D. He really seemed to wait for the episode of this show where, you know, I think I've clearly softened on John Dodson over the years. But he seemed to have waited for me to openly say that I had forgiven him for once being, you know, my most frustrating fighter to watch, that I had in fact come to like him, you know, in the same way that I came to like Michael Bisping after a while. He had earned my respect and my appreciation. He waited for me to admit that out loud with my mouth, in order to turn in possibly the most frustrating John Dodson performance ever. Like a really classic John Dodson just not doing enough kind of performance.
Yeah, this was, this was a combination of just like who he is being exploited.
Yeah.
And, who he is being, you know, pretty annoying. I think you compared it to, Aldo against, Volkanovski.
Dvalishvili was on some Volkanovski shit.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly the fight I was thinking of when I was watching it.
Yeah.
Because this was a guy looking for the perfect shot, and then another guy just spastically feinting his way into range.
Yep.
And then like doing one thing per minute to win that minute. And the other guy just being like, what?
There was some YouTube comment, last week or something that was like, you know, it was like heavy hands episode, feints, jabs, athleticism, you know, just our fucking buzzwords.
Yeah.
The topics and ideas we come back to again and again. So let me just validate your criticism veiled in humor by saying feints. Fighters do feints. They're really, really effective. You know what feinting does? We saw it from Volkanovski. We saw it from Dvalishvili. It gives you, especially against a counterpuncher, it gives you all the benefits of volume with none of the risks. It's really a thing that everyone should be doing all the time. Especially for counterpunchers like Aldo and Dodson, because you're filling their brain. You're filling their fighting computer with all of this data that is meaningless. Or it means whatever you want it to mean. You know, you can, if they react to a feint, you can then set them up for something else. If they don't, you can just hit them with the thing that you feinted. There's always an option. There is no way to lose with a feint. There's no way for a feint to miss. You know, and this is a philosophy that applies to really every strike. Like the jab in particular, I like to say that there's no such thing as a failed jab. You know, if they slip it, now you know which way they slip. That's what a jab is for. In addition to landing, it is for drawing out their defenses. Or if it doesn't connect, it's still effective because it's told you they're too far away. It's told you need to step in closer. The jab is an information gathering tool, for a fighter. An educated lead hand is just that. It's in fact an educating lead hand. It lets you know everything you need to know. And feints are like that, except that like you can't even be countered. Unless you're feinting really badly from in range, you get all of the same benefits and even more flexibility, without the risks. And this was a perfect example. Like, it was not exciting. I will say that up front. Neither was Volkanovski Aldo. But I was still incredibly impressed with Merab Dvalishvili. Because this is a guy, you know, not unlike an earlier Volkanovski to an extent, who threw a lot of power. Early Volkanovski, it was like the switch up between the overhand right and the left kick. And they are both thrown hard, and in combination with each other. And the newer, subtler Volkanovski was really about, in my mind, the introduction of feints and footwork. And in this case, Dvalishvili, he did a great job of maintaining the proper distance. He did not overcommit, to anything. He rarely committed at all, especially for Merab Dvalishvili. Like, knowing who he is as a fighter, to see this kind of discipline, And just like with Volkanovski, it was still an aggressive performance. It's just that it was all fake aggression. He was still, it seemed to me that Dvalishvili still felt comfortable. It still seemed like he felt like he was throwing a lot of volume.
Yeah, you could tell he was having a whale of a time in there.
Yeah, it felt good.
There was a point where Dodson, turned him onto the cage as he charged at him. Mm-hmm. And Dvalishvili just ran headfirst into it. The whole, Rousey home thing. And, Dvalishvili, turned around, laughed, and then, did high knees jogging on the spot for a little bit, and then started doing some, martial arts bouncing on the spot. Uh-huh. He was having a great time.
Yeah.
And he was utterly convinced that he was dictating this fight.
He was.
And it became very clear that he was.
Mm-hmm. And John Dodson, he just wanted to counter. He didn't realize, I think it was far too late in the fight before it sort of dawned on him that he was losing. Just like with Aldo against Volkanovski, I think the time really zipped by because he was just waiting for the openings that pretty much always present themselves. And Merab, I was dead wrong about this, but in my favorite way, which is that Merab Dvalishvili, he really fought against type here, or he showed a new layer to the type of fighter that he is, that we have never seen before. You mentioned last week we had seen more subtlety and craft in his boxing, against, Gustavo Lopez. But, this was a new level. And again, it's not super sexy or exciting or whatever, but it was a lot about just not doing as much or pretending to do as much as he always has without committing. It was a real professional, craftsman kind of performance from of all people, Merab Dvalishvili. So I really actually enjoyed it, even though it was bad. And I was mad at John Dodson. I enjoyed seeing Dvalishvili solve this problem in such a tried and true way. So, that was great. Anything else from UFC 252? Oh, we would be remiss not to mention, Kai Kamaka versus Tony Kelley, I guess. I don't think we have a lot of time to break it down, but the fucking curtain jerker fight on this card was undeniably the best fight of the night. From these two, I was actually pretty, interested in seeing Kai Kamaka. He, not just because he's Polynesian, but he reminded me of a more violent Brad Tavares. Just has a real solid kickboxing style, but he's more aggressive, and also therefore, gets into more problems and has to scrap more. But, after I think pretty much taking control of this fight with Kelley actually did a great job of working his way back into it. I think he landed some really nice clinch knees, and it was just a fucking banger. So just wanted to mention it. Anything else before we? I
didn't actually catch that one for whatever reason. It didn't come up on my fight pass the next day.
You gotta watch it. It was a really good
I'll
fight.
be sure to check it out.
Yeah, it's a banger. And if you out there listening have not seen it, I know you don't expect much from two guys you've never heard of in the very first fight of the night, but if you got Fight Pass, you can watch it right now. And you owe it to yourself to do so. It was a very good fight. All right, well, let's take a break then. When we come back, it's time to look ahead to Pedro Munoz versus Frankie Edgar. Edgar's bantamweight debut. A lot of interesting X factors to discuss there. And Amanda Lemos versus Mizuki Inoue after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about UFC Fight Night, whatever the fuck it is. Pedro Munoz versus Frankie Edgar in the main event. And, if it isn't that, if that isn't about the only fight you really have to care about from this one, other than, Phil, I think you would critique me if I didn't point this out. Marcin Prachnio versus Mike Rodriguez is probably going to be very silly. It's a very heavy hands.
Marcin Prachnio has given us, is one of the funnier light heavyweights out there.
And that's saying something.
He gave us the I'm going to charge forward throwing the same right hand at Sam Alvey moment like multiple times in a row before being knocked out.
The knockout wasn't even a counter to right hand. He literally just walked forward.
Oh yeah, I remember. Oh my god, I forgot that.
He got knocked down on a counter like 3 times and he literally just strode into the final punch. It ruled. It was great. So that'll be funny. But there's not a whole lot technically to break down there. The main event is, it's clearly the most interesting thing on this entire card. We've moved beyond the really the scintillating early pandemic era of UFC into the, oh my god, how are we going to fill the 9,000 cards we've put together for this year, era. So it's great. We're loving it. It's in full swing with this card. This really should be the introduction of this new era. But Munoz-Edgar. Interesting fight. And weirdly, something that didn't even cross my mind until you mentioned it before, but this is obviously a bantamweight fight. It's Frankie Edgar's first bantamweight fight. And looking at their dimensions, Frankie Edgar is going to have not only just general size parity, and possibly even will look bulkier and bigger than Pedro Munoz, he's going to have a reach advantage.
Weird.
Right? And I think that probably hasn't been the case possibly ever. And if it were, then it was against Sean Shirk.
Yeah, it was definitely against Sean Shirk. That guy's a legendary T-Rex. You know who else I was thinking of that we've missed? Faber,
maybe Mendez.
Yeah, I think definitely Faber. I think that's probably the one guy who is like a natural bantamweight that Edgar has actually outsized. It's just, we just kind of forgot it due to the, tendency for super fights that should be exciting to actually be really boring.
He did have a 3-inch reach advantage over Uriah Faber. So, but it's unusual. And this will be the first time that he not only has the reach advantage, but it looks bigger.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be really, really weird. It's also going to be, I assume, tied to those facts. It's going to be the first time that Frankie Edgar looks slower than his opponent. And that's going to be particularly, or it will at least be like operating at the exact same speed, which is something because Pedro Munoz is himself not a particularly, speedy bantamweight. As far as 135ers go, he's fairly slow. So I don't know. Weird dynamics. Obviously, there are a lot of just X factors coming into this one. I don't know. What do you think? What's the shape of this fight in your view?
Well, so there's a few sort of things to think about in the run up. Primarily in this kind of matchup where it's a venomous submission grappler against a wrestler. The first question is, does Frankie wrestle or not?
Yep.
And I think the answer is probably yes, although he will try and set it up a bit.
He's if it's classic Frankie Edgar, he's going to bail on the first 8 takedown attempts, but it will be a goal.
Yeah, so I think if we think of analogs to this, I think there's Brian Ortega and Charles Oliveira.
Mm-hmm.
And Ortega, he mostly used the level change to set up his shots. He didn't really get the chance to go for any real wrestling attacks, and more to the point, he was comically outsized.
Mm-hmm.
Oliveira, he was also comically outsized, but Oliveira was just letting any kind of clinch go to the ground.
Yeah.
He was not fighting takedowns at all. He wasn't exactly pulling guard. He was sometimes, but
and on the feet as well, a totally different dynamic from Pedro Munoz.
Exactly, just like a big guy standing really tall. I don't think Edgar could really help himself a lot of the time.
Yeah. And just being bullied by this little pit bull.
But yeah, and obviously, you know, the last dynamic is one that we've mentioned a lot recently. How does Edgar look at bantamweight?
Yeah.
Because this is very late in a career to be making your first cut.
It's a classic MMA move.
Yeah.
I just, somehow as I keep getting older, I keep doing worse. I know. I'm going to do that thing that professional boxers stop doing when they get older and start cutting more weight. I love it. I always love to see that happen. Yep, I never have high hopes. But of course, you know, with all-time great fighters, I have been wrong in the past. Jose Aldo didn't look near as bad as I expected in either of his bantamweight fights. He looks significantly better than I expected in the most recent one. But also, you know, Frankie Edgar is 38. Never been the kind of athlete Jose Aldo was. His durability seems to have been the thing that's really taken a hit lately, and I don't think that's actually the case for Aldo. So, you know, and durability, it may not even be durability. You know, Edgar used to get dropped all the time, but he had great recovery. So it may also just be the fact that as an older man, his stamina, his conditioning is, the ceiling for how well conditioned he can become is just lower. Or he may have just, you know, his chin is degrading and he just can't absorb the impacts quite as well anymore. So I don't have super high hopes. And that kind of sucks in particular because I really think I would have picked Frankie Edgar in this fight. If it were a few years ago. I shocked you earlier, Phil. I said, if it were the Frankie Edgar that fought Jeremy Stephens, because I think there are a lot of parallels between Munoz and Stephens, and I shocked you by saying that, that fight was nearly 4 years ago.
Yeah.
It feels recent.
Blimey.
But it was November of 2016. And we are coming up on the 4-year anniversary very quickly. So, and yeah, so I'll lay out the parallels why I think, you know, if Edgar does come in looking rejuvenated, and we just saw with JDS, it happens. So if he does come in looking rejuvenated, then, a lot of what we saw in that Stephens fight was him outmaneuvering a more static opponent, someone who really needed to plant their feet, to throw back. And he did a great job of outmaneuvering. He also did a good job of finding small angles. In fact, I sort of see that fight as like the pinnacle of his career as a technician. It's right in that period anyway, where Edgar's athleticism had just started to really fade, and he was forced to develop a more nuanced sort of technique. His technique started to feel a little less rote and a little more thoughtful, particularly in closer ranges. He was able to defend and counter in the pocket with Jeremy Stephens quite a lot, as well as finding angles to get to make sure he wasn't standing in front of Stephens too much. But when he did, it was the best in the pocket defense and combination punching I think I've seen from Frankie Edgar. And there's a lot of that in Pedro Munoz. You know, he's a not as big a puncher as Stephens. He's every bit as, if not more durable though. He's got better cage cutting footwork, and he may not be as powerful a kicker, but I think he's a much more consistent one. He throws a lot of kicks. There are a lot of similarities between him and Stephens as stand-up fighters. And even without his wrestling, really, Edgar beat Stephens, outmaneuvered him on the feet. That path to victory is there. It's just a matter of, do I trust Frankie Edgar to follow it or not? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you also mentioned another analog for this fight, which I think is a really good one, before the show, which was, Munoz versus Brett Johns.
Yeah, great fight.
And, like, it pretty much is a fairly dominating Munoz win, but I think the margins are much narrower than they seemed at the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, the fight really, really turned around at one point, I think late in round 2, where Munoz hurt Johns to the body.
Yeah.
And Johns never really recovered and was in survival mode the whole time.
Then he was taking his legs out every time he landed a low kick. After that, he hurt him to the body again. Yeah, Johns never got, but he fought back like a beast. He really fought back hard.
Yeah, like John's. Yeah, once he got hurt to the body, he'd been defending the low kicks much better before he got hurt to the body. Then he was clearly just thinking, "Ow, my body." And Munoz, to his credit, decided to start carving his legs up.
Yep.
But Munoz, his stand-up reminds me a lot of Vicente Luque.
Yes.
A lot of catch and pitch and high guard.
Yep.
And sort of, sort of early Justin Gaethje as well. And to that extent, catch and return with low kicks as well.
I was saying to you before, just to expand on that slightly, that the Munoz does what you, I think, have to do if you're going to rely on a high guard as much as him, which is that catch and pitch thing you described. If you're going to keep your hands like chained to your chin for defense, then they have to be hair triggers. So when somebody throws a right hand and it hits your left arm and you block it, it's got to be a left hook right away. And Munoz does that. He is actually a really, really consistent counterpuncher. Not super subtle in how he sets them up. It's basically either blocking or ducking. But as soon as you miss or have a shot blocked, he is returning with a combination.
Yep. And yeah, he's got the attributes you need to make that work, which are basically like pace and durability. Mm-hmm. For someone who has only one of those, you can look at like Thomas Almeida, and see how well that works for him. Which is occasionally not that well.
Yep.
But Edgar I think he can exploit this quite well. And, I've been thinking about the whole like height and reach parity thing. And Edgar has always done remarkably well at, reach parity. Even going back to like the first, like Edgar's first coming out party was really when he beat, the then pretty highly touted prospect Tyson Griffin.
Yeah.
And his perhaps one of his very best wins is obviously Chad Mendes,
right?
But yeah, specifically against the high
Stevens, I think fits that. He's sort of in that same reach zone. And Frankie Edgar.
Stevens was clearly like a lot bigger than Edgar, but
but reach wise, Stevens' reach is 71 inches and Edgar's is 72.
Yeah.
So. And Edgar was, as I said, really successful in the pocket with Stevens because he was in his own range.
Yeah. And I think a lot of Edgar's tricks, I think, will work specifically pretty well against Munoz. Mm-hmm. Like his level change left body shot right hand combination.
Yeah. Perfect for that high guard for sure.
So I think there's a lot of like specific things that could make this like a very winnable fight for Edgar, like you said.
There's also Edgar's signature takedown is the running knee tap or knee pick. And I mentioned Munoz throws a lot of kicks. Edgar's pretty good at catching and countering kicks. And
also good at countering kicks with bursts of punches and combinations.
Flurrying on kicks. But if you want a route to the ground, and truly Frankie Edgar will, if he does get top position, will likely be the best top grappler that Munoz has ever faced. His jiu-jitsu is phenomenal, Frankie Edgar.
Yeah, there's Aljamain Sterling, but did they grapple much? I'm forgetting.
They didn't actually. Pretty much all striking.
No. Yeah. I was thinking it was pretty much all just a kickboxing match.
And so that's an option Edgar might want to pursue. And if he does, then being able to catch kicks and get somebody down that way is a way safer route to the ground against Munoz than shooting into his guillotine. So there's a lot of options here for Frankie Edgar. It's just that he's old.
Yep.
And I don't like seeing him move to 135 as a 38-year-old who's just got knocked out. Knocked out basically a billion times, in fact, by a Korean Zombie. So I'm going to pick Pedro Munoz for durability, but all the while I'll be hoping that Edgar shows up looking a little bit like his old self, because if he does, I think he's got a real shot.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, there's always an adjustment period, or pretty much always an adjustment period. People generally need a fight in a division.
Yep.
unfortunately for Edgar, I don't think there are many particularly forgiving fights for him at bantamweight.
No, nor do I think would Frankie Edgar, until he loses like 4 more fights, would he be willing to take a low-level adjustment fight.
I mean, I think that there are more forgiving fights for him. I think, for example, a Merab Dvalishvili or a Ricky Simon, someone just without the power to necessarily trouble him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tend to share your I share your take basically. It's the durability. Like on a stupid tactical level, Munoz does throw a ton of uppercuts, and Edgar's gotten really hideously hurt by uppercuts tons of times for years and years and years.
Yes. It's the same shot has kept hurting him, in fact. It's just he's survived them less and less.
I think we specifically called it in the Korean zombie fight.
Yes, I know, I definitely
So,
did.
like, I don't think Munoz is not nearly as good at landing them as the Korean zombie is, but, I mean, he's just going to have a lot of time to do it.
Yeah. And he's going to feel fast. I really think he's going to feel quick in comparison to Edgar in a way that he doesn't against most bantamweights.
Yeah, and I think specifically in Edgar's, what I think will be Edgar's adjustment fight. So yeah, I got to pick Munoz and probably by some kind of depressing stoppage, but it would be great to see kind of vintage Frankie come out. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It carries interest. We'll let you know next week if we are happy or sad about that interest. Okay, finally, let's just spend a little bit of time on this. I only want to do this because the rest of the card is basically dog shit. And I have been, I think like a lot of MMA fans, interested in Mizuki Inoue for a while because she started super young. That's always compelling when someone comes in as like a 17 or 18-year-old and is just fighting, getting a young veteran sort of learning curve, fighting people who are just genuinely more physically powerful because they are adults, and having to deal with that. And, Inoue has made a couple of adjustments over the years. It feels insane to me that she's 25 years old. I don't know how that's
weird,
right? Because I feel like I've known her as a fighter for, since like 2015. So she's fighting Amanda Lemos here. And, I don't know. Do you have a read on, Inoue as a fighter or on this matchup? I have like my one take that I want to get out, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, Inoue is the better fighter, but is like at a horrendous physical mismatch.
She always is, but Lemos in particular is it seems to be a pretty explosive striker.
So yeah, I mean, basically Lemos was just ground out and kind of bigged by Leslie Smith last time, in that she just expended all her offense as Smith marched her down, and then just didn't, kept trying to regain her range and kept getting mashed back out of it.
Well, her last fight
mashed back into the clinch.
Sorry to interrupt, but her last fight was actually a win over Miranda Granger. Prior to that, she got absolutely sunned by Leslie Smith, or daughtered, as the case may be.
But yeah, I mean, you could see a clear discrepancy in like the way she threw strikes and so on against Leslie Smith. That she's a clean, hard striker. There just wasn't much behind it, and she couldn't keep it up.
Yep.
So, like, the question is, can someone like Inoue, who is small and smaller and weaker than Leslie Smith, although I would say a good deal more skilled, can she kind of replicate that general game plan? Yeah.
And my feeling is maybe. I mean, I think a lot of this hangs on how good Lemos's stamina is. And I don't really have a good read on that because it obviously was catastrophically bad against Leslie Smith. But, first UFC fight, Leslie Smith pressure. Inoue can maybe mimic some of the effects of that game, but she's not Leslie Smith. neither in size or sheer pace. They're like Leslie Smith, I think, may still hold the record for most significant strikes thrown in the UFC. She's like the very top of that list, which is kind of crazy. And so yeah, that's a big difference. But otherwise, Lemos has gotten a lot of first round finishes in her career. I have not seen this fight. I probably could find it. It's a jungle fight event, so I might be able to find it on Fight Pass. But she had a majority draw with a woman named Mayra Cantuaria, who was 2-0 at the time, and then fought her again and did win by a KO in round 3. But if it was a kind of fight, I need to know what that matchup looks like. And otherwise, all of her finishes are in the first round. Several other wins from really small time regional events. The method of win is not even listed. So it's a big mystery to me. If Leslie Smith or Amanda Lemos was more responsible for her gas tank running empty. If it does, then definitely Inoue has room to work in and build. If it does not, I honestly think that Lemos is going to land hard enough shots that she's going to have Inoue twitchy and defensive, even if she's pressing forward, and Inoue is not going to let her hands go often enough. I said this to you earlier, but I used to critique Inoue. I seem to recall critiquing her anyway for having a really handsy defense. She's good at it. A lot of parries, a lot of blocks, combined with the rolls and slips and the footwork. And I think I used to attribute the fact that she wasn't much of a counterpuncher to the fact that she relied on her hands so much to defend herself. Which is why Munoz's use of the high guard is so good, because those hands are used actively for both offense and defense. The two are one and the same. But now, in her most recent fight, Inoue, she took on Yanan Wu and was at a big reach disadvantage, as she pretty much always is. And she seemed a lot more reliant on just the head movement and the footwork. Wasn't a whole lot of parrying at all. She was rolling under and slipping a lot of shots, and she was just never coming back with anything. So it seems like it's more than a technical issue. It seems like it's more of like Dennis Bermudez's mental block, where the connection between offense and defense just isn't there. For whatever reason, it's not been ingrained in her that when you make someone miss, making them pay is the natural next step. And so without that, as long as Lemos is landing the harder shots and can keep it together, I kind of struggle to see Inoue working her way into the fight. The way Smith just insisted on volume, Inoue's going to have to work up to that. So.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that, Wu is very much more aggressive than Lemos is, and just who she is as a fighter. She's just going to throw from all positions.
Yeah.
And I think that was maybe keeping Inoue from really, from getting going, because she was doing a good job of forcing Wu into the fence.
Yep.
But yeah, she was really looking for a moment when Wu would just stop throwing. And I think that'll be much easier to come by for Lemos, because I think in that Smith fight, she was looking sort of Barboza-esque in that she was constantly looking to reset to her own range, reset to her own range, reset to her own range, and Smith just wouldn't let her.
Yep.
So I don't know, I think we're still in for an ugly, close decision, just because I think Lemos's shots will count so much more than Inoue's.
Yeah.
But I'll take Inoue to win a very, very scrappy decision.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it'll be interesting at least. I would still very much like to see Miocic Inoue, figure out the game. But it also may just be a challenge she can never overcome. She's so tiny.
Yep.
She might just be in the Sohee Ham sort of category of, slightly too small to really hang as a featherweight or as a strawweight. All right. Well, that's the upcoming event. That's UFC 252 out of the way as well. And that's about it for the show. Before we wrap up for good, Phil, have you done any reading this week? Anything to plug? Lord knows you haven't produced anything of your own.
I certainly have not, apart from my incredible take on Twitter on the future progression of the UFC light heavyweight belt. And yeah, I'd like everyone to rally behind cancelling Glover versus Thiago Santos and instead booking the fight we all want to see, Jiri Prochaska against Thiago Santos.
As usual, you've produced nothing other than a sort of cloud of wry ennui. It just follows you around and infects those around you. But it is a funny chart. I got a good giggle out of it. You should check that out. Well, as for us, I finally posted that bonus episode that we recorded a week ago. It's probably well past the point at which anyone but our patrons are really interested in hearing us. You may have, by this point, forgotten who Alexei Oleinik and Derek Lewis even are. But you should go to the Heavy Hands Patreon. It's $3 a month to check out all those episodes. And in the meantime, if you want an additional bonus episode this month, I'm planning another one. But if you want a third bonus piece of bonus content in there, I demand that you find Kyle MacLachlan on Twitter. Not the actor, the asshole, okay? At Pulgas Boxeo. Find that man and harass him, because the Historical Perspective 3-hour Ramblecast edition is in his incapable hands. And it's been that way for at least a week. And perhaps he has found that, like me, trying to pick out the content from 3 hours of Kyle MacLachlan rambling is a daunting task indeed. So go bug.
Oh, that does remind me though.
Yeah.
That I did read one of the things I did read was Kyle and Danny doing a piece on doing a debate on who the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time is, where Danny takes the incorrect assumption that it's Stipe Miocic because he beat better people or whatever, and Kyle takes the correct one that it is Fedor Emelianenko because he never lost to Stefan Struve. And that's a good piece to read.
It's gotta be, because when Fujita hurt Fedor with a punch, Fedor got mad and beat him for it. All right?
Yep.
That's what goats do. I agree with that.
And
yes.
it also proves that Kyle is a dickhead because he's happy to work on these kind of things and not on sitting there with audio software and painstakingly cutting apart his and your inane ramblings.
Yeah, a thing that will go on the Patreon that only you and I make money from. What the fuck, Kyle? What gives?
God damn it, Kyle.
Yeah. So I actually really enjoy, I don't always, I usually find like, GOAT and rankings talk and like dream matchups talk pretty grating and exhausting. I really enjoy when Kyle does it because he really knows his shit. He has a very good historical grasp of several different combat sports. So, please go check that out. And that Danny Martin guy's okay too, I guess. Find Phil and I on social media if you have any comments, questions, criticisms, concerns, cacophonous complaints. You can find Phil on there at Evil Greg Jackson and myself at Boxing Bush with a B-U-S-C-H spelling. And again, check out the Heavy Hands Patreon for the bonus episode and more in the future. $3 a month. You can afford that. And we can't afford not to have you, please. We're hungry. We're desperate. We're tired. We want to cash out. We don't want to do this UFC schedule anymore. No, actually, I should mention, sorry, as a final note, just before we leave, Phil and I are going to ignore one of these upcoming UFC shows. It might be this next one, or the one after, but we're going to end up skipping one of these soon and just having a guest on probably, and or covering a topic, because we don't want to just be chained to this relentless schedule that just keeps getting less and less compelling. So look forward to that in addition to our continuing coverage of these UFC events. And until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.